Welcome back to the SimTech podcast. In this episode, me and Channon sit down with Jordan to explore the cutting-edge VR project he's been working on. From immersive training experiences to innovative applications in healthcare simulation, we dive into how virtual reality is transforming the way we learn and practice critical skills. Join us as we discuss the benefits, challenges, and the future of VR in simulation. Plus, Jordan shares insights on some of his most exciting projects and the impact they're having in the field. Whether you're a simulation technician, educator, or just curious about VR in healthcare, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. So, let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the SimTech podcast. Today we're going to be jumping into the community to get to know some of its members. And to help me do that, I've brought on a family favourite of the show. Welcome back, Channon.
Hello everybody, I'm Channon. I'm the Simulation Teaching Fellow working here at CDDFT.
And we've brought along someone who probably doesn't need introducing too much into simulation, and when technology is mentioned, your name kind of always pops up, Jordan. Jordan, would you like to give yourself a little bit of an introduction?
That's kind. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. So I'm Dr. Jordan Tsigarides. I'm a rheumatologist by training. I'm a senior rheumatology fellow based in Cambridge, but I'm also a senior research fellow working at University of East Anglia. Currently doing my PhD in virtual reality, which is highly relevant to this podcast, but also been working in virtual reality for the last 8 years or so. And I'm sure we'll get on to talk about those things later.
I think the first came across you, Jordan, on one of the monthly meetings that I think it might have been HE that was doing at the time, or NHS England, their virtual reality monthly meetings.
Yes.
What was you doing at that time? Can you remember what you were presenting?
Oh, yeah, that was quite a few years ago. I think that might have been some of the work that I did with Health Education England directly. So that included creation of five-part journey of a patient who has complex multimorbidity, so multiple long-term conditions. And essentially, the whole frame around that was for junior doctors who were doing a program called the Enhanced Program, which is it's a bit like normal junior doctor training when you've just qualified from medical school, but then also you have this additional layer of training around complex multimorbidity, around person-centered care, and around sustainability and health equity. So this was around complex multimorbidity. And at the time we created 5 modules. So it followed Peter, who was our patient, who initially was confused at home and was seen by a heart failure nurse and a doctor, then was admitted to hospital. So you saw things from his perspective in A&E, and all of this was captured in 360-degree video, but then designed to be used in virtual reality. You then saw him transition to the ward setting, where you actually took the perspective of the doctor who was looking after him. Then you saw him in the outpatient setting, where he was followed up by the older person's medicine team. And then finally, at the end, you see him in his daughter's home, actually, having a conversation around end-of-life care. Not to spoil it for those that haven't seen it yet, but it sort of follows his whole journey through healthcare. And I think at the time, from memory, that's what I was presenting, perhaps. It was around that project, but there's been quite a few over the years, so it's hard to completely remember.
So one of the things that me and Channon were just discussing was we want to do some point of view 360 work, but we're struggling maybe with the how, rather than, because the 360 camera, as replacing your head, we obviously can't cut off the head of the person, and we obviously can't put the camera in their mouth. How did you get around those kind of issues, Jordan?
Yeah, they are really challenging issues. I mean, you say you can't cut off the head, but you can cut off the head of mannequins. So that's what we did for a lot of. So I've done a couple of projects early on. One on dementia education, where you took the perspective of a person living with dementia who came into hospital, and again one around the Enhanced Program. And for both of those, we used a simulation mannequin. I think it was actually sort of form of Rita Sani, perhaps, and we took the head off the mannequin, and then we put, so at the time I was using an Insta360 Pro camera, which it's like an orb. It's sort of the size of someone's head anyway, which kind of helps in this situation because you know where it's supposed to sit. And we used quite a small it wasn't like a selfie stick, but it was like a tripod, just the shaft of the tripod, attached the camera. We placed it in the mannequin essentially because the thoracic cavity is essentially empty in these mannequins, so you can sort of place it in. We then tied it into position where it would be in a sort of head-like position, and put it in place. So for the dementia program, it was in a hospital bed where we had it sat up, so the head was in the position that the patient's head would be. And then we captured it from that perspective. So when you look down, you see a body, and we put a jumper on the patient and clothing, and we had the bed covers sort of in a position they would be. So when you look down, it gave us sort of an element of fidelity that it could be your body, it could be a real body. Now the problem with that, of course, is if you move your arms, you don't move your arms in the real thing. In
that's
VR,
kind of the problem that we're dealing with, aren't we?
Yeah.
So we want people's arms to move, don't we?
Yeah, so I want to film a delirium VR. So kind of 3-part, fly on the wall from the nurse's perspective, interacting with the patient, and then from the patient's perspective, so kind of them pulling away, lashing out. And it's just the
We
challenge
did
of
discuss having a mannequin, didn't we? But we really want them to feel like they're a real person with real arm movements and almost trapped inside this person and looking out of their eyes. How would you do that then, Jordan? Do you think? Because at the moment we're working on like helmets and with the camera maybe on top, but then your shoulders and your arms are going to be too far down.
Yeah. I'm going to be totally honest. I think it's extremely difficult because there are a few things that you need to consider. One is the experience of the person when they're actually in VR, because you'll see the movements of the arms of the nurse if you had a head-mounted system, but those movements won't replicate your movements. So you'll feel that sort of disconnect there anyway. The other problem is if they're moving around, which they inevitably will be with a head-mounted system, you need to have good stabilization so that they don't feel sick, because movement which is unmatched in virtual reality compared to your movement in real life can make people feel cyber sick. And that's, to be honest, why we have stuck with stationary setups, because we even bought a VR dolly from Manfrotto early on, where you can move the camera in a stable position. With the idea that you could do things like ward rounds in virtual reality and move the camera with the staff. But we avoided that again because the one thing you don't want to do is give people a bad VR experience. And this is a rule really for any VR, whether it's therapeutics, whether it's simulation, whether it's whatever. You don't want to give them a bad experience, because often it's the first time people have put a headset on, or it's very early on in their sort of VR life, what you might say, their VR experience. And if you give them a bad experience early on, they often disengage from the technology. And that's something really to keep in mind. So I have seen head-mounted systems, like you say, where you've got like early on in this sort of process, it was GoPros in a rig that people would then mount to a cap or a head-mounted system. These days, you could definitely do it with an Insta360 One X4, which is a new sort of shorter camera that we use quite a lot of with two fisheyes on it. It's so light. But again, the problem you're going to get, as you said, is you'll see elements of the person below you, but you'll feel too high. If you have the camera mounted in front, you'll miss everything behind. So I think probably the only way to do it is by using 180 video instead.
Yeah, I think we saw a picture of almost like a diver or a space helmet, so the circle that goes around your neck, and then they've got a 180 on the front and a 180 on the back. But then you've just got to kind of worry about how you stitch them both together, which I've never done because, again, I am with the Insta360 X series, which kind of does all this magic for you. And make it so easy. I mean, Channon, are you sold on the idea? I know we've discussed it, but you really wanted a real person, didn't you?
I just like to make your life difficult, I think.
Yeah, but again, it's the moving within the movement that bothered me, because I like, again, like you said, Jordan, I like them to be in control of where they look, and I don't like them thinking actually, because they'll still be in control of where they look, but then you've got the person's also moving, so you've got almost that double movement, which I was kind of worried about.
Yeah, I think one way the best way of doing this really is to have a mocap system where and this is probably beyond the technical capabilities of the department, but it's where you put someone in a movement capture suit and you have a green screen room and then you capture their movement, and then you replicate that into an environment like Unity, where you can embody a sort of avatar which moves appropriately, and then when your arms move, it moves. But I've seen that done in a few spaces. We're actually doing that with the company that I work closely with. We're doing a sort of R&D project with a conflict resolution company called Icon, where we're doing motion capture alongside the West Suffolk Professional Development Centre, which are based in Bury St Edmunds. Essentially what they're doing is one of their students is doing some motion capture with a variety of different techniques that you can use for conflict resolution. So if someone, and this is all about sort of like if someone grabs you, what do you do in that situation? So they did a load of motion capture for different grab poses and how you can get out of those poses, and how it's almost like a martial arts in a way, and how you can how you can react and stuff. But the great thing about that is that you have the ability to embody an avatar in a space where you can move, and actually you can get response based on how you move. But yeah, with 360 video, it's challenging. I see what you're saying, and the stitching process, unless you've got two cameras which fully overlap, so it would need to be more than 180 if it's on the front and the back of their head. It would need to be probably at least 200, I'd imagine. I think the stitching wouldn't be too difficult, because you've got some really good stitching packages out there these days that can help you with that. And if it's just two lenses, then it's much easier than if you have like a 6-lens system like the Insta360 Pro was, which is an absolute nightmare. So it's probably doable. It's just whether, as you say, whether you want to do it and whether it's going to add to your learning, related to the project you're thinking of.
Yeah. Are you convinced?
We'll have to have a think, won't we?
We will.
We'll have to have a think.
Anyway, yeah. Jordan, we came on to speak about you, not so selfishly talking about us. All right, so Jordan, over to you. Really, what are you working on at the moment?
So a few things. I think the main project that we're working on at the moment is called the Insight Program, and it's a series of, it's 360-degree video based, but it's designed and intended for virtual reality consumption. Although this is something that will probably come up throughout this podcast and others, is that we feel accessibility is absolutely key. And I think giving access to these sorts of experiences just in VR, particularly at the moment where VR is still, unfortunately, not as available as we'd like it to be, having access on desktop screens and on mobile devices is also super important, especially when you're trying to reach, potentially thousands of learners across a large geographical space. So the great thing about 360 video is you can use it in VR, but you can also use it on desktop screens, mobile devices, etc. And so all of the things that we do now is a sort of hybrid between computer generated at one end of the spectrum and 360 video at the other. It's a sort of interactive 360 video where we have hotspots that are overlaid on top of the 360 video and various bits of interactivity that you can have as you go along. So the Insight program, coming back to that, is a series of modules that have been developed predominantly for primary care to try and support not just doctors, but nurses, physiotherapists, and other allied health professionals with some of these really key topic areas. And that includes, we've done 4 projects so far, 4 modules so far. One is in chronic pain, which is my sort of subspecialist interest for rheumatology, which is obviously very challenging at times because it's so complex. We've got a module on dementia. This is mainly early dementia for people who develop dementia at a sort of early age, but we're just about to do one on advanced dementia, which is for people who have it who are at a later stage in their life and perhaps are in a care home, for example. We've just done a project in South London on home visits and being able to, if you're going into someone's home, how you can interact with them and examine them and see them and actually assess them in an often alien and challenging environment. And then we've just also completed one on women's health around menopause treatment, use of HRT, and some of the challenges that come with that. And another one, I should say, we've just also finished one in association with the Felix Cobbold Trust, who are an agricultural charity based in Suffolk, on farmers' suicide risk and farmers' mental health, which is obviously extremely topical and important at the moment, given the current sort of situation. Each of these programs, the reason they're called the Insight program is that they follow a patient through their journey. So they start usually at the beginning, perhaps when that person's having symptoms or having particular difficulties in their life. It could be at work or at home or with their family members or with colleagues. And then it tracks them through their healthcare journey, whether it's to see the GP or to see the hospital doctors or or wherever they sort of move through that sort of their healthcare engagement, and then it tracks their progress. So in some cases, people maybe don't do so well for various reasons, and there's learning around why that happens. In other cases, they do well, and we talk about why they did well in that situation, and the approach of the doctor and the impact and that kind of thing. And we have these things called stop and think moments, where you get a piece of content. So you might get, for the chronic pain module, for example, it starts in the patient's home, where the person's talking to their daughter about their symptoms. And then it's about 2 minutes of video, and then it stops. And it allows you to then reflect on what you've seen, on what you understand about chronic pain, and what you think's going on, thinking about what diagnoses might be present, then what you would do if you saw this person for the first time, that kind of thing. And then you get a bit more content. So then they go and see the GP, and you get a sort of initial consultation, that kind of thing. And then there's another stop and think. So it's sort of broken up. One module broken up into smaller parts, with these stop and think moments acting as educational scaffolding, I guess, for the hopefully very realistic and high fidelity simulation type content that you get around that. So yeah, the insight reason it's called insight is because we do some perspective switching. So as you were talking about, we do a lot of stuff where you step into the shoes of the patient, and you can hear their thoughts as they are perhaps having a consultation with a GP, or speaking to their daughter, or even sort of trying to manage day-to-day life in their work setting. And then you also feel like you are embodying that person. So all of the speech is very centralized. It's louder. It sounds like it's coming from you. So the dialogue sounds like, when you're stepping into the shoes of the person, sounds like it's coming from you. And that can be extremely powerful, especially in 360, because the person in front of you, instead of you being a fly on the wall, is actually directing their dialogue to you, and they're actually speaking to you. And that can be, extremely powerful. And I think a really good use of virtual reality, that first person perspective. So that's a bit of an overview.
If I see this right in my head, then Jordan, it seems like it's mostly software based. I mean, what software are you using for this kind of project?
Yeah, so it's obviously the 360-degree video capture. It's the whole process is akin to creating a film. So we always start with storyboarding, then we write a script. We've got medical script writers that write scripts for us, and we do an iterative process where they'll write a first draft. We'll provide feedback, or I'll provide feedback. Then it goes to a stakeholder engagement phase. So we have people with either lived experience or clinical expertise, or people that live sort of working on the ground in this area will then provide feedback, and we'll iterate the script. Then we'll get actors in to do all of the roles. So we don't use volunteers anymore. We pretty much always use actors. And the reason for that is so we can hit various checkpoints and certain content, and it's more challenging. Obviously, as clinicians, we're not designed and used to learning a script, so it's quite difficult. So we do the filming of that, and then as far as coming back to your question around software, we stitch all of those 360 videos using usually the Insta360 stitchers, because we use Insta360 cameras. They're usually pretty good, but we also use Mystica if required. We've got access to Mystica as a stitching software. Then after it's all stitched, it gets edited in Premiere Pro, which allows us to add, to make sure the color's graded properly, to add auditory components to it, audio editing. So that includes things like if you've got a telephone consultation, adding a telephone filter, that kind of thing.
Do you do subtitles as well?
We actually don't do subtitles for our 360 videos. And the reason for that, and we've toyed with this for accessibility purposes, but the reason for that really is that I think it breaks the immersion. The whole point of it is to try and feel like you're sitting in the room with the people, or you're taking the perspective of the person. And I think if you add subtitles, it can really break the immersion. So we try not to pollute it too much.
I had this exact conversation with NHS England, because they're very big on putting the subtitles in, and I was like, although we applaud this kind of initiative for making accessibility, but I mean, how many have we done? We've probably done thousands, and we haven't had anyone that's needed subtitles or anything yet. So it almost seems, I don't want to say it might feel a bit un-PC, but to ruin it for the many, when actually, depending on what your demographic are. What do you think, Channon?
Yeah, I think it's also how we've been using our 360 VR simulation. So we'll have a group of participants, maybe max 15, because we have 15 headsets per kit. and they'll watch. So we split them into short segments, but then instead of your pause and think moments, we take the headsets off fully, and we'll have a group discussion, and kind of there'll be a facilitator in the room, rather than somebody watching and pausing and thinking and going through it on their own, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I suppose that's one of the good things about what Jordan's doing is it's almost autonomous in it, where the learner can learn in their bedrooms rather than needing a facilitator. For instance, it could be pre-course material or learning before they turn up.
That's a really interesting point, because you obviously often design materials based on how it's going to be delivered. And I think we designed it in this way because we thought, well, doctors, nurses, physios, there's always a conflict between delivering care and having access to education. And often that means education comes second best, right? So you often find that whether it's in a hospital or in a GP practice, the education is pushed to the side, and it's often due to time and resources. So we thought if we created these things so that they could be used autonomously, so that if you had time, you either use it at home or at the weekend, or you could use it outside of your clinic time. You could put a headset on in the department or in the GP practice, and you can just engage with it. We thought that would be of real value. But we also did an evaluation to compare group facilitated ways of engaging with the content and solo experiences. And actually the group found it really useful to be able to discuss the different things that they saw. So I think having those stop and think moments, they could be either used as you engage with the questions that are posed to you and you engage with the content, or they could be used as a point where you say, okay, let's pause, take the headsets off, let's have a discussion, let's have a group facilitated session. And then you get different learning based on which way you deliver it. But it usually depends on context and the environment in which you're learning and the setup of your GP practice or your hospital and the time you have. There's so many different factors there. But yeah, I think group facilitated sessions are often optimal and often the best way of consuming these things, because you get so much from other people and how they've perceived it and how they would respond. So I would definitely encourage you, if you can, to keep doing that. But at the same time, it's always thinking about accessibility and how you can use these things in a challenging clinical environment.
I assume you've come across these classrooms in a box kind of kits from River and Jordan. What do you think of them?
I think they're very good. I mean, the one that I see quite a lot is, and I'm assuming you're referring to the VR headsets in a box type thing where So there are a few companies doing that, and the company that I work closely with are sort of doing it. I mean, they provide a sort of flight case which has all of the headsets in there with the content loaded on, that kind of thing, and that's actually how they're delivering it to GP practices. It's usually boxes of 5, for example, but there's also companies like River and others out there that do these sort of classrooms in the box, right? I think the concept is great, and having it all there, one of the biggest challenge I think with VR is the implementation stage. It's getting people that have never used it before, perhaps people that are technophobic a little bit, that are a bit apprehensive, getting them straight into the content without having to faff around with the menus and the buttons you have to press, and having troubleshooting issues and having batteries that run out and all that stuff. So the good thing about these flight cases and these sort of classrooms in the box is they often have charging, which is great because they're ready to go when you're ready for when you want to use them. They are often, all the headsets are in one place, so it's not like you've picked up a headset, hopefully, and it's gone missing and you need to find it for a session, all that sort of stuff. And, they're in often sealable, secure boxes that you can take around with you, so they can be moved from practice to practice, department to department. So I think the concept of them is great. But then again, that's one part of the picture. Content is really extremely important here. And I think providing generic content is, in some situations, is difficult and doesn't often hit the learning that it needs to. And I'm thinking of things like, there's a lot of simulation platforms out there that provide generic, you can see a patient with shortness of breath and how do you assess them. I think that is fine for early learners, but when it comes to sort of complex decision making, there needs to be some sort of tailoring to the group that are learning from it, but also some complexity and discussion that occurs around the patient. And often some of these sort of one-size-fits-all approaches can, although they're very scalable, can sort of lack a bit of that nuance that's quite important. So overall, I think it's a great thing being able to provide all of those headsets in one place to be able to access it. But then the content is always one of the most important things.
Yeah, exactly. So to take it back a little bit, because we kind of branched off a little bit there,
Yeah.
once you've finished with Adobe
Mm.
Premiere and you've got your product, how do you get it out to the masses?
So I guess there's a stage just before that. So once you finish with Adobe Premiere, you have all of your stitch content, which is all edited and ready to be put into a next step, which is where you add your interactivity. Now, we used to use or we still use it a bit, but use a package called 3D Vista, which you've probably heard of. The great thing about it is that it's a one-off cost. So for hospitals, for universities, there's not an ongoing subscription, which can be really challenging from a procurement perspective. The other good thing about it is it's an actually very powerful piece of technology or software that you can add most things that you want to add into the interactivity. So, for example, if you had a room where you wanted to highlight certain risks, you can mask things in the scene, and then you can click on those, and then it will launch different types of content up. And it has a VR menu system, and it's very, very it's a very, very flexible piece of software.
So it's like a scenario VR or a thing link,
Exactly.
those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the great thing, it's a one-off cost. It's they're constantly updating it. These days you can have 3D models integrated, and it's a really good piece of software. The big problem, as we've sort of scaled our capabilities and created a much more professional setup, the problem with it is that the delivery part sort of falls short when you're delivering it in VR, because it's fantastic for web-based or mobile delivery. It's brilliant. It's pretty faultless. I mean, it does adaptable video compression and all sorts of really cool stuff. But when it comes to VR, it's often just doesn't deliver the experience that you really want, where, for example, when you'll click a trigger, for example, on the controller, sometimes it doesn't react as you wish. Sometimes it's a bit laggy. Sometimes it depending on how you deliver it. If you want to deliver it in 8K, like we do, you have to use a WebXR link. And when you do that, you then have to contend with all of the issues around browsers in things like the Meta Quest headsets. There's a load of different implementation challenges that come with using that piece of software. So more recently, we've now transitioned to using Unity as our main software for the interactivity. So we'll put our 360 content into a Unity framework, and then you get all of your interactivity that's sort of applied on top of it with that. It's a games development software, basically Unity, that's applied on top of it in Unity. And then at the end of it, you can get an offline it's called an APK, so it's like a package that you can then load onto headsets. And we use remote management as well, so you can upload them remotely if you want to do a software update or whatever, you can do that remotely. So if the headsets are in the field, you don't have to bring them all back to a central position. So we've been through a bit of a journey, but anyone that's starting out and wants to do interactivity on 360 video or 360 photo, 3D Vista is fantastic. And I know Health Education England, people like Nick Perez, for example, based down in Torbay, he's used it extensively. I believe there are some HEE sort of general buttons and things that have been created by Nick's team at what used to be Health Education England, that you can also use and download. So it's a really good package, but there are some challenges there.
How do you send it to people then? So you've got this large file. How do you make it go onto a computer or people's phones then?
Yeah, so you're right. The files are often large, especially when you're using 8K and if you've got a really long system. So sometimes they can be, between 10 and 20 gig. So pretty big packages. So there's a few ways. If you're delivering it online. So at the moment, what we do is host a sort of virtual tour package, as you might call it, on a server. So we've got Amazon S3 servers that we host the content on. You can then get a link that comes off of that, and then you can use that link to send it to whoever wants to use it online or on their mobile device. In the very near future, we'll be moving to what we call a WebGL delivery, which again, it will be behind a link, but there will be a sort of interactive package that will pop up once you open that link, and it's just a different way of doing it. So that's, if you wanted to use it non-immersively outside of VR, that's how you would do it. For VR, it's slightly different. So if you're using it as a WebXR package because you want to deliver it at really high level, like an 8K video, for example, you often then have to cache the content to the headset, and that this is where the challenge comes in with using 3D Vista. You then have to download essentially that 15 or 20 gig to the headset, which is obviously a big amount of storage. It can take a bit of time, but then the good thing, it's locally available offline. And this is something just to discuss, I guess, is that using Wi-Fi, and particularly in healthcare settings, is really difficult. I don't know about you where you're based, but certainly in our hospital we use NHS Wi-Fi. In our university we use EduRoam, and using those two things to try and access a high quality VR experience is almost impossible.
Yeah,
So
I have had enough having a Teams meeting most times.
Yeah.
It's
yeah,
like you say, you can't get on the corporate Wi-Fi because then you've got to introduce IT into the conversation, which has its own barriers. But yeah, we're generally a free NHS Wi-Fi. Click to accept terms and conditions.
it's very difficult. So we've tried to move to offline usability, where you can either download the package locally to the device, or it's preloaded onto headsets so that you don't have to worry about the internet connection at all. And we found that that's the most accessible way of doing it, because you really don't want to be in a situation where you're just about to deliver some education and you've got to download a 15 gigabyte package using the NHS Wi-Fi. It's almost impossible, right? So everything that we do now is designed to be used offline. So you can download these packages locally to your device, or to your laptop, or to your phone, using a button that you press at the top, and you can do that with 3D Vista. For the VR content, we often will, like I say, cache the content to the headset so that when you open it up without a Wi-Fi connection, it will work. And with our Unity build, it's going to be where you have something called an APK, which is a software file which is loaded onto the headset in advance. And then there's sort of like a data file that includes all of the videos and the big chunky data that's also side loaded onto the headsets, or can be downloaded outside of a teaching session, in preparation for a teaching session, for example. So yeah, everything that we do, really, we try and make sure it's applicable offline.
Do anyone use your programs or scenarios on like immersive backgrounds or anything like that?
What do you mean, like immersive classrooms where you have projectors, that kind of thing?
Generate or an immersive studio kind of thing?
Yeah, so we've done a couple of sort of bits with using that. The university that I work at have an immersive classroom with a projector system. Generally, because of the way that the content is designed, it's designed to be sort of a narrative driven content that you go through from start, and you move through the package and you learn as you go along. They're sort of not set up as such for those immersive environments, because those immersive environments often you use the 360 as a sort of environmental cue in a way, and then you do a simulation perhaps in the space that is in the room, or in the cave, or in whatever. And these sort of aren't set up as such for that. So they usually use things like, they're doing an operation type environment, a surgical environment. They'll have a background surgical sphere, which is usually a looping video, and then they'll do a simulation in the space in front. Whereas our content is much more for either solo or group facilitated use, rather than sort of cave setups.
Yeah. All right, Shannon. So I brought you on here to maybe talk a little bit about what you're planning to do next week. Do you want to tell Jordan our plans and see what he thinks?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have script writers.
Or actors.
Or actors. It's an all hands on deck approach. So in the process of developing a course for newly qualified doctors focused on coming across medical emergencies in the community whilst off duty, because it's something that's not necessarily a medical skill. And within that, we're going to film a 360 VR of a medical emergency on board an aeroplane. So we are
exciting.
We're off to Manchester Aerodrome next week to film.
We tried getting a real aeroplane. We did a lot of cold calling, didn't we? But we drew a blank, so we've had to settle for I don't like using this word on this platform, a simulator, an aeroplane simulator. So as you can imagine, something where pilots might go to train without being able to crash, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so they've got quite a unique space there. So it's an old 747, but they basically got the full kind of top cabin kitted out as first class. So we're not touching the flight simulator bit, but we're just using kind of their environment.
Yeah, and so we're planning on doing how many scenarios? 3 scenarios in an afternoon?
Yeah, so we've scripted for 4 in case we get some extra time, but if not, we've got 3 that we definitely want to do.
And we're taking along things like Vivian for the life cast, because we're going to have a
Cardiac arrest.
cardiac arrest.
Okay, great. Well, not for Vivian, but
yeah. And we want to do are we still doing a by the side first responders?
Yeah, so
as
we
well?
also within the course want to have a kind of medical emergency at the roadside, but that's gonna throw a whole host of technical difficulties that Craig's got to deal with.
Yeah, so probably you feel the pain as well. So audio is normally our biggest challenge here.
Yeah.
How do you get around your audio issues there, Jordan?
With great difficulty. It's not easy, really not easy. So it's been a bit of an evolution over the years. I used to just use the H3VR ambisonic microphone, which
so
is
that's the
Zoom.
one that's generally what we use.
Yeah, the big problem with that I found, if you're in loud environments, you just get complete noise pollution. So I did that. Like a couple of early projects I did were in resus, and it was really loud. It was in a working resus, and you couldn't hear the healthcare professional's voice very well. We actually made a learning point out of that, and we said, how do you communicate in these challenging environments, which I think is something you know to consider. But what you really want is high quality multi-stream or multi-channel audio that comes from each of the actors or the healthcare professionals or whatever that comes in.
Like a wireless lavalier microphone thing.
Exactly right. Yeah. So we use the Rode Go mics now. It's not perfect, I have to say. I think as we now have a sound engineer that works with us that actually has got years of experience of doing this, and even he finds it challenging, to be honest, because you can't have boom mics, you can't have shotguns, you can't have you can use ambisonics, but then there's the problem with that, as we said, is that noise pollution. Yeah, I think from my experience, for high quality experiences and learning, you just need to be able to, without having to strain, hear exactly what people are saying, so you know exactly what they're saying, and be able to isolate that. So yeah, we use labs. We previously, when I was doing the audio all on my own, which was challenging, I was basically the videographer, the director, the audio person, and sometimes the actor. A bit like I know you know that process.
Yeah.
We used to use labs, but I used to have them visible, and I think that's fine actually, because after a very short period of time, you just don't notice them anymore.
Yeah.
But now we work with a professional sound engineer. It's a bit taboo to do that, because you should never be able to see the mic. You know, it should always be high quality audio. And so we now hide them. The problem you get with that is you get rustling on clothing, especially if you've got a really a lot of movement. And in this situation, when you're doing things like CPR, it's challenging. So the other option is using covert mics, where you hide them in the room. And I just, my one take home, I think, is just have as many backups and as many channels as you can. And then when it comes to actually putting it all together, you find the best channel for what you're trying to achieve. So it might be you have a covert mic, which is hidden sort of near the action. You have a mic on the camera, or maybe even two. You have mics on the actors, or on the talent, as they like to be called, or of the healthcare professionals. And then if you get dirty audio because of movement, at least you've got backups. I think backups are so important when it comes to 360 video.
Yeah, I think that's what we're going with. We're going with 2 shotguns under the chairs of the aeroplane.
We're quite lucky because of the aeroplane setup. There's lots of places you can hide mics, whereas if you were kind of a clinical environment, you just don't have that.
Yeah, and then we've got the microphone under the camera, so that's where the zoom is. So we're going to have would each of the Ben say one pan left, one pan right for the shotgun mics, and then we've got the overall one. But then, is too much audio? Because you said you can never have too much, but then you've got all of this audio, and now you just need to make it work.
Yeah, I think the big challenge is the person that's editing it, and the time it takes. You know, which is going to be you, Craig, I guess. Is it?
Well, so
my husband's a broadcast engineer by trade, so
we've got a bit of talent. Yeah. And then the next challenge for us was the lighting on the aeroplane, because it's essentially a reception area. It's got quite romantic lighting.
Yes.
So
LEDs.
So we're bringing a couple of strong I still don't really know what you call directional lighting things, and they're going to be
But
hidden under the camera.
Yes.
Under the camera.
Okay.
So just like a big bulb, but we was worried, or I'm worried, it might cause glare up, but we seem to have done some practices, and it seems to be all right, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's what my weekend was spent doing.
Yeah.
Have you? I'm guessing you've seen the halo light. So we sometimes use a halo light, and it's like a big. I'm trying to think. I can send you a link to it later. I can't remember.
Bushman.
Oh, that's right, the Bushman.
Yeah. That's what we've got.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I mean,
it's
relatively good. And like you said, it doesn't generally produce too many sort of weird shadows and things because it's a sort of 360 lighting setup. If it's really low light, the big thing you have to worry about is the fact that the 360-degree cameras often have small, what's the word? Sort of small lenses. So that the lenses on the 360 cameras often don't let in a lot of light. So in low light situations, they're not great.
Yeah, it becomes really grainy, doesn't it? So we did a recce. So we've been to this place already, and we recorded it in the darkness.
Yeah.
And it becomes quite grainy in the darkness.
That's right.
Yeah.
You get a lot of noise. Which camera are you using?
So we're just a 1x2, mainly because that's how long we've had it, and so we're probably 30 videos deep at this time. So we've got quite a lot of experience in recording. And with all of them, we've had a couple of hits and a couple of misses. So we've learned along the way. But this seems to be the biggest project that Shannon's undertaking.
I just like to have wild ideas and make life difficult, basically.
Just to say, I think it's really exciting and the thing about VR, right, is that you want to be able to feel like you're in an environment that you're not in very often. So a plane situation is really, really great. As a doctor, I've not been called for a plane emergency, but on the last flight I was on, there was someone behind me who was unwell, and the stewardesses were struggling a bit, and I sort of said I'm a doctor, and then helped. I think they were like, "Oh, great, he can just look after him now." But you are sort of, you're in a situation where you often don't have access to a lot of materials or technologies or investigations, and you have to communicate with usually the doctors on the ground. One of the examples I'm thinking of is Stuart Pearce. I mean, you must have heard about Stuart Pearce recently, very recently, in the last few months. I think he went over to the US, I think it was, and on the plane he had what sounds like an arrhythmia. So I think it was either atrial fibrillation or an SVT, and he was sort of in and out of consciousness. So he was hemodynamically unstable, and the staff on the airplane basically managed him, did an ECG, they had access to all sorts of different technologies, spoke to the people down below, and they actually had an emergency landing, I think, in Canada. And he then got some treatment in the hospital there. But that sort of environment, that sort of setup, is exactly, I think your project is going to be really exciting to be able to train doctors about what to do, because I'm sure a lot of them would feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah, the idea is it's kind of out of that hospital setting, away from your medical kit. You've basically got yourself, your non-technical skills, and how you can apply those. Yeah.
Well, I mean, certain things just keep you up at night, don't they? And it's not if it's gonna happen. It's just when it's going to happen. It's
the dread, isn't it? It's So I've just come back from America and got on the plane from Heathrow, and the announcement went out. We've got a passenger on board with a severe nut allergy. Please, nobody consume nuts. So then me for the whole flight was like on edge.
You should have taken the camera with you. There we go.
Thankfully, they were okay.
All right, guys. As I knew, time would certainly fly by. Jordan, you want to add anything before we look at signing off? Do you think you've covered everything?
Well, there's always lots to talk about. I mean, we could talk probably for the next 2 hours, I'd imagine, on this. I think, I've really found it important when you're designing these things to create, like I say, it's more akin to creating like a film, to create really realistic, believable characters that play either the patient or the GP. It has to be something that is evidence-based, that is hopefully, if you've got the capacity to, informed by people that have actually been through this experience and have lived experience, and people that do this on the ground, and then it has to be believable when it's delivered. I've seen quite a lot of stuff which is quite scripted and feels very robotic and not quite real, and I think that takes a lot away from the experience. And so So yeah, I think my one take home or second take home for people would be, when you're designing these, think of it as a realistic representation of a real life scenario, but at the same time, you really, as a person watching this and engaging with this, you really want to connect emotionally with the patient, and these are often really challenging discussions that you have in VR. You really want to connect emotionally with the scenario, with the people that are in the scenario, the patient, the family members. Just think about that when you're putting it all together. But VR can be such a powerful tool for understanding these sort of complex decision making.
One thing that strikes me is, why do we, I can only speak for ourselves, why do we put so much effort into 360 videos in planning and getting the actors right, but yet sometimes our simulations, regular scenarios, are not as powerful or well thought through? We don't really think about story and the characters. But on that bombshell, maybe we've got a scenario, a podcast number 2 coming from this about actual scenarios. All right, Jordan, Shannon,
That'd be great.
Perfectly. Thank you for coming and joining us today.
No, thank you very much,
Jordan, and thank you for coming along. And hopefully, we'll get you on again, because, like you say, we've got loads to unpack here, haven't we?
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the SimTech podcast. A huge thank you to Jordan for joining us and sharing his insights into the exciting world of VR in simulation. It's clear that virtual reality is pushing the boundaries of immersive learning, and we can't wait to see where this innovation takes us next. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your fellow simulation enthusiasts. If you've got a topic or a guest you'd like to hear from, please let me know. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on the next time on the SimTech podcast.